Veterans give everything for their country, but who's really looking out for them? What Jungkook did inside the Seoul National Veterans Hospital shocked even the doctors. No one saw it coming. No reporters, no camera crews, no grand announcement on social media. Just a quiet arrival of a black SUV rolling up to the hospital on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon. The hospital was busy as always, with doctors and nurses moving with quiet urgency, tending to soldiers, men and women who had given pieces of themselves, sometimes quite literally, in service to their country. Most of them had no idea who had just stepped through the entrance. Jungkook walked in without the usual fanfare. No flashing lights, no press conferences. His usual vibrant energy seemed dialed down, his movements measured. He wasn't here for publicity or to make headlines. This was personal. The hospital director, Dr. Lee Mi-ho, greeted him with a firm handshake and led him through the corridors. "They don't know you're coming," he said quietly. "It might be better that way." Jungkook simply nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. Somewhere down the hallway, the sound of a wheelchair's wheels squeaked against the polished floor. A soldier, missing both legs, maneuvered himself into one of the common rooms. Another sat with his head down, eyes locked on his phone, the weight of his reality pressing down like an invisible force. Jungkook took it all in. This wasn't just another visit. This wasn't about optics. This was something else. But the moment that would leave everyone speechless was still ahead. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens. The hum of medical monitors blended with the occasional muffled conversation. Jungkook walked past open doors, catching glimpses of men and women whose bodies bore the cost of war. Missing limbs, burned scars, eyes that held stories too heavy for words. A few patients recognized him. Some sat up straighter. Others hesitated, unsure whether to wave or simply nod. One soldier, his left arm in a sling, gave a thumbs up. Jungkook returned the gesture. A small but genuine exchange. He stopped at the door of Sergeant Kim Min-jae, a 29-year-old who had served 3 tours in the DMZ. His right leg had been amputated below the knee, but his spirit remained intact. "Didn't expect to see you here," Min-jae said, adjusting himself in bed. Jungkook pulled up a chair. "Didn't expect to be here," he admitted. "But I heard about you guys. Figured I should see for myself." Min-jae smirked. "They keeping you on a short leash? Or do you actually get to walk around?" Jungkook chuckled. "They'll let me walk around as long as I don't cause trouble." For the next few minutes, they talked, not about fame, not about music, just life. Min-jae cracked jokes about the hospital food and how he planned to outrun every physical therapist who tried to make him do another round of rehab. For a moment, it felt normal. Jungkook stood to leave. "You need anything?" Min-jae hesitated, then shook his head. "Just keep looking out for guys like us." Jungkook gave a firm pat on his shoulder before stepping back into the hallway. But it wasn't until he reached the last room on the right that everything changed. The hospital wasn't quiet anymore. Word had spread. Some patients wheeled themselves into the hall. Others propped themselves up in bed, peering through their open doors. Whatever they thought of him, good, bad, indifferent, one thing was clear. Jungkook was here, and he wasn't rushing through like a celebrity on a schedule. He was stopping, listening. In one room. He sat beside Private First Class Park Ji-soo, a 22-year-old with a fresh bandage wrapped around his head. Shrapnel had taken part of his hearing, and his speech was slow and deliberate. "I had plans," Ji-soo said, his voice quieter than the machines beeping behind him. "College, maybe law school." He exhaled, staring at his hands. "Now I don't know." Jungkook leaned in slightly. "You're young. You got time to figure it out." Ji-soo let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, but what if I can't?" For a second, Jungkook didn't say anything. Then, in a rare moment of direct honesty, he admitted, "I don't have that answer. But I know one thing. You don't quit. You don't let this decide the rest of your life." Ji-soo nodded, his expression unreadable. "Guess I don't have a choice, huh?" Jungkook stood, offering a handshake. "You do, and you make the right one." The next room was different. Lieutenant Kang Hyun-woo, a 41-year-old Army Ranger, sat upright, his wife and 2 kids by his side. A long scar ran from his temple to his jawline. His uniform hung neatly in the corner, the name tag still pinned in place. His wife, Soo-jin, smiled politely. "Didn't expect visitors today." Jungkook glanced at the kids, maybe 6 and 8 years old. They looked at him with wide eyes, unsure if they should be excited or afraid. "What happened to him?" the youngest asked, pointing to his father's scar. Before anyone could answer, Hyun-woo ruffled his son's hair. "Something that was worth it." Jungkook watched the exchange, something shifting in his expression. He shook Hyun-woo's hand firmly. Hell of a family you've got here." Sujin nodded. "They're why he fought." Jungkook turned to leave, but paused. "Make sure they know what he did for them." Sujin smiled, but the weight of those words hung in the air long after he left the room. But it was in the next room that Jungkook came face to face with something that stopped him in his tracks. The room felt smaller than the others, fewer machines, fewer visitors. Just one man sitting in a hospital bed, staring at the television without really watching it. The sound was off. Jungkook stepped inside. The Marine didn't react right away. He was young, maybe 24 or 25, with a short buzz cut and a strong jawline. The kind of guy who had probably run 5 miles before sunrise every day for years. Now, he wasn't moving at all. "Mind if I sit?" Jungkook asked. The Marine's eyes flickered toward him, then back to the screen. He shrugged. "It's a free country." Jungkook pulled up a chair. "What's your name?" "Corporal Lee Taeyong," he replied, his voice flat, practiced, like he'd answered that question 100 times in the last few weeks. Jungkook glanced at the wheelchair parked near the foot of the bed. "How long have you been here?" Taeyong sighed, rubbing his temple. "Since the blast. 3 months." A beat of silence. "Doctors say you're stuck in that chair?" Taeyong nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, they say the spine's done. No more running. No more jumping. Just this." He motioned toward the chair with a bitterness that could cut steel. "And after rehab? Maybe a desk job. Maybe nothing." He let out a dry laugh. "Bet that makes a great headline, huh? Marine gives everything, gets nothing." Jungkook sat back, studying him. He wasn't here to argue, to tell him to stay positive or push through. This kid had lost something no speech could bring back. "I won't pretend to know what that feels like," Jungkook said finally. "But I'll tell you this. You're not forgotten." Taeyong scoffed. "That's what they all say." Jungkook didn't blink. "Because it's true." Something in the Marine's face shifted. His hands curled in a fist on his lap, his breath uneven. "You know what I hate?" he muttered. "I hate that I'd do it again. That if I had to, I'd take the same damn risk." Jungkook didn't interrupt. He let the words hang in the air. "I didn't do it for fame," Taeyong continued. "Didn't do it for medals or handshakes. I did it because it was the right thing to do." And now he swallowed hard. "Now I'm just another guy in a wheelchair. Another guy waiting to be forgotten." For the first time since stepping into the room, Jungkook leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice dropped lower, steady. "You're not just another guy," he said. "You're the reason this country still has men willing to fight." Taeyong clenched his jaw, looking away. Jungkook exhaled, tapping his fingers against the armrest. Then, in a quiet but certain voice, he said, "I want to do something for you." Taeyong frowned. "Like what?" Jungkook stood up, looking him dead in the eye. "Something no one else will." And what he said next left the entire hospital in stunned silence. The room had gone silent. Even the hum of medical monitors seemed distant. Jungkook stood there, his hands resting on the back of the chair he'd just been sitting in. Corporal Lee Taeyong stared at him, waiting for the usual words, the generic promises, the "we'll take care of you" speech that meant nothing outside of the hospital walls. But that's not what happened. Jungkook exhaled through his nose, his eyes sharp with something Taeyong couldn't quite place. "I'm setting up a foundation in your name," he said. "Not a charity, not a PR move. A real foundation for men like you. Guys who come back and get stuck in some system that forgets about them." Taeyong's brow furrowed. "What? You're not going to rot in this hospital," Jungkook continued. "You're not going to spend the next 10 years wondering if anyone remembers what you gave. I'm making sure you and every other veteran in your position get the rehab, the support, the future you deserve." Taeyong blinked. His hands, which had been curled into fists, loosened slightly. "You're serious?" Jungkook didn't waver. Dead serious. The door had been slightly open, and now a handful of nurses stood just outside, frozen in place. A doctor leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Even the Marine in the next bed over, who had been pretending not to listen, turned his head slightly. "Sir," Taeyong started, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. For the first time since he'd woken up in this hospital, he felt something unfamiliar, a crack in the numbness. "Hope." Jungkook reached out and clasped Taeyong's hand, squeezing firmly. "This isn't for the cameras. This isn't for fame. This is because I can, and because you damn well earned it." Taeyong swallowed hard, his throat tight. From the hallway, someone whispered, "Did he just say what I think he said?" And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but in every person who heard it. For a moment, no one moved. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Even the usual background noise of the hospital, the distant hum of footsteps, the soft murmur of conversations, seemed to fade. Then one of the nurses outside the door exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. Another exchanged wide-eyed glances with a colleague. The doctor who had been leaning against the wall straightened up, but all eyes were on Corporal Lee Tae-young. He wasn't the kind of man who cried easily. The Marines had hardened him, taught him to bury his emotions deep. Yet here he was sitting in that hospital bed, blinking rapidly, his throat working to push down whatever was rising inside him. His fingers tightened around Jungkook's hand, gripping it with a strength that defied his injuries. "I don't," he stopped, shook his head, then tried again. "I don't know what to say." Jungkook gave a small nod. "Then don't say anything. Just get better." The doctor finally spoke. "Jungkook SSI, this is not what I expected today." His voice was careful, controlled, but there was something in his expression, something close to admiration. Jungkook turned toward him. "What do you need to make this happen?" The doctor hesitated, glancing at Tae-young before answering. "Rehab, specialized therapy, long-term care that the VA doesn't always cover. We do what we can, but it's never enough." Jungkook's response was immediate. "Then I'll cover what they don't." The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket that a younger Marine in the next bed over, his face still lined with healing burns, let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered. "Guess I should have asked for a Ferrari." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but the weight of what had just happened remained. Outside the room, a small crowd had gathered. Nurses, doctors, a few hospital staff. Some of them whispered to each other. Others just stood there, stunned. One of them, a nurse in her 50s, pressed a hand to her chest. "I've worked here for 20 years, she murmured. "I've never seen anything like this." A few feet away, a soldier in a wheelchair wiped at his face discreetly. Turning away, Jungkook straightened up. "Make sure he gets what he needs," he said to the doctor. "And not just him, every soldier like him." The doctor nodded slowly. "We'll do our part. But Jungkook SSI, are you sure about this?" Jungkook's gaze flickered back to Tae-young. The young Marine sat there, still gripping the sheets like he was afraid to let go of this moment. "I don't make promises I don't keep." And then, without another word, he walked out of the room. Jungkook didn't look back as he walked down the hall. The weight of the moment followed him, but he carried it like a man used to expectations, used to the eyes watching his every move. But this wasn't a concert or a fan event. There were no flashing cameras, no press pool waiting to spin the story. It was just the quiet shuffle of hospital staff, the murmured voices of recovering soldiers, the scent of antiseptic hanging in the air. The nurses and doctors who had overheard the exchange didn't stop him, but their expressions spoke volumes. Some looked stunned, others just stared, as if trying to process what had just happened. As he reached the hospital's main corridor, he passed by a Vietnam veteran sitting in a wheelchair near the window. The old soldier had deep lines carved into his face, his hair thin, but still holding streaks of its original dark brown. His hands rested on his knees, calloused and worn. "Jungkook SSI," the man rasped, stopping Jungkook mid-step. Jungkook turned. The veteran studied him for a long moment, then nodded, not in admiration, not in blind loyalty, but in understanding. "They won't forget this." Jungkook held his gaze for a second, then simply said, "Good." And that was it. No speech, no grand farewell. He pushed open the door and stepped into the cold afternoon air, his security detail falling in behind him that a hospital worker near the entrance muttered under his breath. Did that really just happen? But inside, back in that hospital room, Corporal Lee Tae-young just sat there, staring at the ceiling, gripping the sheets like he was holding on to something that for the first time in a long time felt real. The news never covered it. There were no headlines, no viral clips, no commentators dissecting every word. But in the quiet halls of the Seoul National Veterans Hospital, something had changed. The doctors whispered about it between shifts. The nurses who had seen it firsthand carried the moment with them. And the soldiers, the ones who had spent weeks, months, even years feeling like forgotten relics, felt something they hadn't in a long time. Acknowledged. For Corporal Lee Tae-young, life didn't suddenly become easy. He still had long months of rehab ahead, still had moments where he stared at his motionless legs and felt the frustration creep back in. But he wasn't alone. The foundation that Jungkook had promised, it was real. Within weeks, it started taking shape. Funding specialized rehab programs, offering career training, ensuring that men like Tae-young had more than just a folded flag and a list of benefits that barely covered the cost of living. And it didn't stop there. Other veterans who had overheard that conversation started talking more. Stories came out, stories of men and women who had given everything and gotten little in return. The ripple effect reached beyond the hospital, beyond Seoul, beyond fame itself. Because at the core of it, this wasn't about music or popularity. It was about something much simpler, a promise kept. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Words are easy, speeches are rehearsed. But when a man follows through on a promise, when he looks someone in the eye and says, "You're not forgotten," and then proves it, that's what really matters. Maybe we don't need more grand gestures. Maybe we don't need more empty promises. Maybe what we need is more action, more moments that remind us that behind every uniform is a person who gave up more than most of us will ever understand. And maybe, just maybe, it's our job to make sure they never have to wonder if it was worth it, that if you believe that the sacrifices of these men and women should never be forgotten, take a moment. Share this story. Keep their names alive. Because at the end of the day, a nation is only as strong as the way it treats those who fought for it.